Okay, before we get started, I'm actually recording this at the end of this job, not at the beginning, but I wanted to share some tips and have a bit of a discussion before I get into the meat of this project from a video perspective, so you can see what I did to replace the front shocks on my 2013 Black Diamond Chevy Avalanche LTZ. The first thing is that the replacement shocks that I bought were the type where they did not come with the springs. Now, there are kits that you can buy, or sets, I should say, that come with the springs pre-installed. The reason I didn't go that route was chiefly because, at least on the Rock Auto website, they did not have the set of springs plus shocks in original OEM brand. So they were different brands that I'm not familiar with, and also, just as a general rule of thumb, I try really hard to use almost as exclusively as I can original OEM parts. You see all of the professionals on YouTube like Eric O and that guy Rain Man Ray and others who are Eric the Car Guy, although he's disappeared of late. They all talk about using OEM parts because aftermarket parts are not as reliable. So you can buy a brand new part, install it, and discover that it doesn't work. So to avoid that kind of stuff, I try to get OEM parts wherever I can. And in this particular case, on Rock Auto, they did not have OEM coils plus shocks on their website, but they did have OEM shocks, so I bought the OEM shocks. So when the OEM shocks showed up, a couple things. There's this plastic ring. It's been compressed onto this, but it does, if I persuaded it, it would come off. There's this plastic ring down here. I would recommend that you, before you get into this job, if you're going to go the route of just getting the shock without the springs and everything in between already attached to it, I would order this spacer, or whatever they call it, and just replace it. If you're replacing your shocks are going to have anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 plus miles on it, and this little hunk of plastic has done its job. It deserves its rest in landfill or recycling center. So just spend the $7 or $8 and replace these plastic washers on both shocks. That's my first piece of advice. The other piece of advice, which I also learned the hard way, this nut, which goes on the end of the shock, pretty badly rusted, and a new nut does not come with the shock. It is available. You can order it separately, which I didn't even realize was a thing. So I didn't order it, and so for the driver's side shock, I kind of ground off as much of the rust as I could and dunked it in some navel jelly, and then gooped it up with fluid film. But for the right shock, before I got into the job, I ordered a replacement nut and went all new for the passenger side shock. And my recommendation to you is to get this replacement nut, because you really don't know how bad is on your shock and how badly corroded that is. If you're in the Northeast, I'll bet you the top of the shock nut is probably going to be in much worse shape than this. So replace this. Don't quibble about it. It doesn't cost a hell of a lot of money. I think it's around $4 or $5. So order that as well. So you want the plastic spacer, don't quibble about it. Again, it's not super expensive. It's done its time. Replace it. And the shock. The other thing that I will mention is that although for the passenger side, the driver's side, I'm saying too much. The driver's side came off relatively easily, this nut. However, the passenger side would not come off. I beat on it and I beat on it, And since I'm using spring compressors, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, I didn't want to beat on it too much because I was afraid that I would encourage those spring compressors to let loose, which would be a really bad day. So I took my Dremel tool and I cut the shaft, since the whole object is to replace the old shock anyway. I cut the shaft because my standard length deep sockets would not reach without having some of this shaft cut away. So I cut away as much of the shaft as I needed to so that I could get a deep socket fully seated around that nut. And then I used an impact wrench and the nut came loose on the passenger side immediately without any fuss. So be prepared for that if you need to. Once you've cut that shaft, you're committed, because you probably won't be able to put this shock back on if you need to back off the job for whatever reason. These are the so-called auto ride shocks. There you see the hole in the center of the shaft. I'm not exactly sure how all of that works, but you will also see me later on in this video talk about breaking one of those sensors, because I didn't understand how to get it off, and it was the plastic. The sensor's made out of plastic. So you know what happens with older cars and plastic. The plastic gets brittle. So I broke the sensor, and I'm gonna in this video I'm going to show you how to get that auto ride sensor off without breaking it, hopefully, and spare you some of the trouble that I have. Now I did repair that again, as you'll see in the video. I repaired that sensor with epoxy. I consider that temporary, but there is next to no information on that auto ride sensor out on the interweb. So I've got a friend of mine who's a mechanic who's trying to look that up for me based on the VIN of my car, so that I can order the part. It's most likely going to be a GM dealer only part. I may even have to go to a junkyard to hunt it down. So now on some of these aftermarket shocks that have auto ride, they come with the sensor, but for this OEM shock, only the shock and only the shock came, so no sensor, no nut as I mentioned, no plastic washer, just the shock. So again, be prepared for that and be careful with that auto ride sensor, because I suspect it's going to be expensive to replace it. So that's it with the shock. Now let's talk about spring compressors. Probably every professional mechanic that you will talk to are going to tell you not to use spring compressors. And the reason for that is they are inherently dangerous. If you think about it, car coil springs are pretty beefy. On the Chevy Avalanche, they're very beefy. They're heavy duty, or at least in my opinion, they're heavy duty springs. And if these castings should let go while you have the spring compressed, you can be very seriously injured. You could even be killed if this thing lets go in the wrong way and hits you in the wrong spot. That's no exaggeration. There have been cases in the past where people have died as a result of their injuries because a spring compressor let loose. I chose to go the spring compressor way. It's my choice. I am not endorsing this solution for anyone. Sorry if you can hear the background noise. I'm not endorsing this solution for anybody else. This was my choice because I wanted to get this job done in a day, and the mechanics, like I know Erico at one point had mentioned, hey, you know, just bring your springs to a shop. They've got a spring press. They'll be happy to take the springs off for you, what have you. And that might be true. I'm certain that it's true for Erico, but Erico is like 800-900 miles away. And around here, to take a shock to a shop and say, hey, I need you to take the spring off, they might say okay, but they're most likely going to say, we're too busy right now, come back later. And if I've got my daily driver up on jack stands doing this job, I cannot afford to wait for whenever the shop can get to it in their busy schedule. So that is the logic behind me going this route. I got what appeared to me to be the heaviest duty spring compressor on Amazon. I'm not going to share what brand or anything like that because somebody might misinterpret that as me endorsing this method, and I can't do that because I don't want to get sued because somebody else said, well, you know, Mike said he did it and it was fine, so he recommended that I do it, and so here I am in the hospital with a big hole in my belly from where I got impaled by the spring compressor letting loose. So I am not endorsing this. It was my personal choice. It is dangerous. It's a risky business. If you don't know what you're doing, if you're not familiar with this kind of thing, you shouldn't do it anyway. I had my reasons for going this route. I bought these spring compressors specifically for this job. I've never done spring compressor work before, although obviously I was familiar with their function from past car fixing activity. And this is not something that I would rush to do again. So if these shocks lasted me, in my particular case with mostly highway driving, I got 115,000 miles out of these shocks before the car started to seem a little bouncy. If I get another 115,000 miles out of this next set, hopefully by the time it comes to replace them again, maybe I'll take it to a professional or what have you. But this is an extremely dangerous way to go. You have to be extremely careful. You have to know what you're doing. And I'm not going to share any of that information with you because my encouragement to you is to buy the shock and the coil as a replacement unit, and don't mess with this shifting the old coil springs over to the new shocks. That's my recommendation. So yes, I'm a bit of a hypocrite here because I didn't do that. So yeah, I saved myself a couple $100, and I didn't have to take my shocks to the local shop and wait a day or more for them to swap them out and all of that stuff. Again, I did take the expedient route, and I took a pretty significant risk in going the expedient route, and I do not encourage you to follow in my footsteps in this regard in any way. Nonetheless, you're going to see what it takes so that you can make an informed decision, and maybe take my advice to not do this and to just get the shock and coil as a set, already assembled and just ready to install, and hopefully you go that route and you don't follow the fool, as they say, and go in my footsteps and take the coil off and swap it out. So that's my little disclaimer here that again, can't say it enough. Very dangerous road to travel, and if you do it wrong, or you get a pair of springs that are, you know, mystery brand Chinesium, and the castings are bad, or or you don't know what you're doing and you got the wrong type of compressor and it was for light duty springs instead of heavy duty springs or whatever, you can bluntly put, you can really fuck yourself up. Don't do it is what I'm telling you. So with those disclaimers in place, we're gonna get into the meat of this video, and you'll see everything that I'm talking about, and we'll just go from there. So onward and upward, as they say. Time for the next automotive adventure here. And that adventure is going to be replacing the front shocks on my 2013 Chevy Avalanche LTZ Black Diamond. And so I'm sourcing parts and it doesn't seem like this job's going to be too complicated. I'm going to replace both front shocks. The car's got 114,000 miles on it, and the shocks are original, and the car seems to be starting to get a little bit bouncy, not dramatically noticeable, but based on my own research online, you can call it that, air quotes research, lots of comments about how these shocks really only last typically less than 100,000 miles. Some people saying that they last 50,000 miles. I'm sure that the type of driving that you do, highway versus city, has a lot to do with that. But I figure it's time. These are OEM. Let's see if I can. Come on, focus. Focus. These are OEM shocks, and they're pricey. About $280 on Rock Auto, not a sponsor. And but I like the way that the car drives, factory with factory parts. So I wanted to maintain that. So I decided to go with OEM parts, which is generally my preference. Unless I know of better parts that will work for sure with the Avalanche. I did look briefly at Bilstein shocks. Went on the Bilstein website and put in my vehicle information. It said, "Sorry, Charlie, we don't have any shocks for you." I have seen videos out there that, if you will, retrofitted 5100 Bilstein shocks into Avalanche, but I'm not that adventurous, so I'm going with the OEM parts. So order them from Rock Auto, got them. After I ordered these parts, I saw some discussion about this plastic spacer potentially not being reusable from the old shock to be able to be transferred to the new shock relative to its expense, which I think is $7 or $8. I figured I would just preventively replace it. So these spacers go like so, or bushings, or whatever they're called. This is where it lives, and so I've got new of them. So, and those are the only parts that I'm aware of that I really absolutely have to have. Here's the bag for the other. I bought a pair of them, and that's the part number. Oh, thank you for focusing. And so now we've got, I think we're in a good position to get this work started. The hardware up top doesn't seem that it is, at least from the other videos I've seen, doesn't seem to normally require replacement. You can just swap them out. I do have spring compressors that I purchased. And we'll get into these more when we get to that point in the work. So I'm going to try and detail as much of this as possible. There are a bunch of videos on the 1500 series GM, but there's nothing out there that I'm aware of specifically for the 2013 Chevy Avalanche. And even though it's the same, I mentioned this on other videos, I personally find it a little bit reassuring to see a video of my particular make and model car. So I'm going to make a video on changing these shocks out for those of you who have a Chevy Avalanche in the 2013 series, or is it 2007 to 2013 was the last generation? Be that as it may, you can look that up. But anyway, like I said, it's a little bit reassuring to see the actual car that you've got being worked on, so that you kind of know what to expect. So we're going to get into it, and that's what the project is going to be. So we'll be removing the shocks. We will be transferring the coil spring and other related hardware from one shock to the other. And while I'm at it, although, as I said, we'll get more into these spring compressors when the time comes, I will say that the professional opinion is universally that these things are dangerous and that you shouldn't use them. So I'll put it out there. These things are dangerous and you shouldn't use them, and I'm doing this at my own risk because I don't have proper spring press, I guess is what they're called. And the next best thing, which some people have suggested, is take it to a shop and ask them to do it for you. And I'm sure that there are shops out there that are happy to accommodate that, but the shops around me are, yeah, well, we can't do it today, we're too busy, come back tomorrow or the next day or whatever. And once I start this job, I want it finished, so that does not work for me. Not endorsing this method, I'm just telling you that's what I'm using, and I'm acknowledging that there are many people out there who feel that these tools are very dangerous and that you can hurt yourself pretty badly if things go wrong. So if you follow down that road, you do so at your own risk. And just as a general disclaimer, which I'm also going to put in the description of this video, is that I'm a car owner. I'm not a professional mechanic. This is my own car that I do my own work on as much as I possibly can, and so anything that you choose to do that you've seen on this video, you choose to do so at your own risk, knowing full well that I am an amateur, and I may make amateur mistakes that professionals don't make, and hopefully, even if I do make mistakes, I'm not going to hurt myself too badly. So I'm not going to start this work until tomorrow, so we'll get the car up on jack stands, get the tires off, and then get to work. So this is just the beginning. So for you it'll be a second, and for me it'll be another day. See ya. Bye. Okay, first steps in getting the shocks off. I'm going to start with the driver's side shock. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to crack the nuts on the top of the shock housing. So the nuts are under these wire harness holders, I guess. There's a sensor of some kind on the center shaft, and then there's another one here, one of these wire harness holders, and then here. So they just pull off, and then from there I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to crack these nuts. Not going to remove them. The car's still on the ground. Just want to make sure they'll loosen. Then I will loosen the lug nuts before I jack up the car. Not remove them, just crack them while the tire is still on the ground. Then let's engage the parking brakes together, and I will also chock the rear tire to make sure the car doesn't move. But before I do all of that, I'm going to wait maybe 15 minutes because I just ran an errand with this truck, and it's a little warm, so let the brakes cool off, let the engine cool off a little bit before we start moving on stuff. So but that's the battle plan in terms of how to approach getting the shock off. So see you in a second. Well, one came off. Two came off. Three came off. Why isn't that center connector coming off? Don't know. And I don't want to break it. Let's get a large pair of pliers. That's interesting. That is a sensor, and I broke the sensor. I'm gonna have to research that. But it was held down with this clip, and I pulled up and I broke the plastic. So this sensor is going to need to be replaced. Maybe I'll have better luck with the sensor on the other side. Actually have not seen any videos that talked about this sensor, so we've learned something. I'll have to find out what this sensor is, and hopefully a place like AutoZone has it. Okay. Let's get some PB Blaster on here. Oh, come on. There's nothing I hate more. Well, that's not true. There are things I hate more, but there are a few things I hate more than having a big can of PB Blaster that doesn't work. Okay, let's see what size nuts these are. $15, $16 maybe. Larger. Okay. That is 18 millimeter. And again, the objective is I just want to crack them. There, that one's turned a little. That one's turned a little. They're not very tight, which is great for loosening anyway. Okay, all three nuts on top of the shock are loose, and so now we take the tire off and we start working on the bottom. But first I'm going to pause and I'm going to do a little bit more research on that sensor. So I'll be back.